Welcome back to the X Podcast. I am with some of my favorite people and friends today. I am with Tim, the legend.
You must be talking about
more. I am with Zach, the Goat Brown.
I think
Like that one?
just like LeBron James, the GOAT.
See, I'm getting excited. What's my
we need
my
to
title?
workshop that then.
I wouldn't
And then
bring up GOAT.
I am with Stu Blackbeard Redzenak.
Yes,
here
there
in
you
the
go.
flesh.
It's a Hostetter, but I'll take the Blackbeard
But you're
comment.
related.
It's because of my sister Sophia over here.
But I call him Blackbeard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he did look like Blackbeard
Yeah.
a little bit more when he had his
Long
pirate
I
hair.
know.
dread hair.
But
I'm
now
I'm
you
missing
got-
it.
You got now it's
It's
clean,
I don't know.
clean cut.
So,
I'm still a pirate at heart though. So
Yeah.
Oh, you look very. You look like a preppy pirate.
yeah,
today.
it's like a reformed,
Reformed.
found Jesus pirate.
So Stu is brand new to the podcast table,
Yeah.
and one of my favorite people ever. He's what I look like in my dreams. Number one. Number two, him and his entire family is just the.
There's a lot of people that you look like in your dreams. I just want to point that out.
I want to point out that you can never dream too big.
Yeah.
You know. Number two, just family here at the church. They're amazing. You and your family have been here. I don't know, parts of your family. How long?
Yeah, I started coming probably 2013, I'd
Say
say.
10 years ago.
Yep, and actually a spontaneous baptism. Got my wife texted my dad last minute and said, "Hey, you got to get here," and he's been coming ever since with my mom. They talk like this is their church, and I don't even belong anymore. You know, it's amazing. It just shows you the seeds when you show up just by showing up.
Yeah.
What that can do to splinter from there. So yeah, we're going over about a decade now. So
I love it.
That's
Well,
cool.
for anybody just meeting him, I'm just going to say right off the bat a few things that I really like about you personally. Number one, you are a really deep contrarian thinker. And we really value that at this table. You think deeply, and I feel like you march to the beat of your own drummer. You and your family, this is going to sound weird. How do I phrase this? Y'all have created your own, what's the word? Not commune, but it feels like commune out. This property that is just gorgeous. And I feel like you're one of the few families I've watched that it's like you like dreamed about the life you wanted to create and then you created it. And it's really fun to watch. It's really fun to watch not just the home you've built, the travels. People give me sometimes a hard time like, man, I'm like, you guys beat me. Every time I look, y'all are
Every
like
month.
Yeah.
in Italy or China or somewhere. And so I love your adventurous spirit. But what I love the most is unless somebody just gets to know you, they might be like, man, this is just a cool, tatted pirate family. What they don't realize is you're actually one of the most generous, loving,
Yeah.
mission-minded families I have ever met. You have like a sign before you leave. What's the sign y'all put up before you leave your house?
the now entering the mission field.
Now entering the mission field.
Yeah.
And just the stories I hear of just anytime you come in contact with people in public, you are not, a lot of people of faith watch and listen to this. You're not a Sunday Christian. You're like whenever you go into Target Christian. you are somebody wherever you go. So anyways, I just thought it'd be fun to have you on, number one, because we're going to talk about some fun stuff today. And number two, as somebody that I love to talk about travels with, because we both just got back from overseas.
Mm-hmm.
You just got back from where?
Canada, British Columbia area of
Okay.
Canada, so Vancouver.
Yeah.
We were
I
there
hear
for.
it's breathtaking.
Oh, it's gorgeous. It's such a perfect mix. So a lot of people don't realize. So you're in Canada, but Vancouver is it's almost like a small Asia. So when Asia kind of started up and coming and families were getting more wealth, a lot of them actually moved to Vancouver. I call it Little Hong Kong. So you're eating, I love Asian food. So you're eating just amazing, just ramen and just everything you can think of, dumplings. But then the next day you're hiking a mountain out in the actual scenery side of it. So for me, it's a perfect mix of food I love. People are just nice, but then going in the mountains is just, you guys all, I'm sure, have experienced it. It's just breathtaking.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
not to just instantly bring it back to churchy, but it's just inspiring to see the landscape God formed, with His
Yeah.
hand. Just just in its natural state. Just it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Weather's just like today.
You're an outdoors person.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's that?
You're an outdoors person.
Yeah, I
Do you
am.
get your love for Asian culture from your dad? Because your dad spent a lot.
He
spent
did.
A bit amount of time
He
in the-
spent. He traveled to all throughout Taiwan, China. I believe it was started in the 80s. Could have been sooner. He traveled most of probably till I was 14 years. He spent 14 years old. He spent about 3 to 4 months a year in China. So I have friends of his that I call uncle, because they're just that close. So I was constantly being introduced to the culture, to the food, to just the way of life. So I'm kind of a sucker for it. I enjoy.
Can I ask you something? Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I could go over some hibachi grilled
Yeah.
chicken, right
Yeah.
now, fried rice, and
You,
Hey,
my
we-
dad
we
loves
talked
hibachi.
about-
I love it. I could, man.
We
that
talked
sounds
about going
really
to
good.
Tokyo hopefully someday
Oh yeah,
soon.
we're supposed to go to Tokyo
We'll
next
see.
year. We'll see what
There you
we'll see what
We're gonna
happens.
go to
Talking-
You're gonna go to Tokyo at Disney Seas and see the new Fantasy Springs that was opened up at.
Wow.
Okay,
You know, this
yeah.
may shock
I don't think
you.
they were
We
thinking
have
of going to
not
Tokyo to
talked
go to
about
Disney.
that.
If you, I'm not gonna say it.
Okay.
You know what? I want to ask you something here on air that, they always ask Barney and How I Met Your Mother. What do you actually do?
That's a great
Yeah,
question.
I don't know.
And are you like personally independently wealthy so you don't have
Yeah,
to work?
yep. I hit the lottery and
That's what I wonder
COVID.
Yes,
sometimes.
yes.
No, I've always had a passion of kind of, to allude to some of the nice words you flattered me with at the beginning there. I've always had a passion to kind of do my own thing. Me and Dad were in business a lot together, and not unfortunately, but younger me come out of college, I took the corporate path. I was always just trying to excel there, and I always had this tug, just do my own thing, kind of walk to my own drum, as you'd say. And so COVID came. I was in the event industry still. The trade show company I work for set the Arnold Classic, which everyone in this area should be pretty
Yeah.
familiar with.
Yeah.
That was a small time family owned business. I actually had set the 2020 Arnold show when all of a sudden we started figuring out what COVID was.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so I had, millions of dollars of freight set on the floor. We were ready to open doors.
Did they cancel it?
They did. The governor was going to, they were doing all the stuff. They were coming up rules. They were going to open it. And then over the night before, the governor said, we're not going to open. And I had to repack that show. And it actually put that business under because that business alone supported the whole operation in Ohio. But during that, I just took it as a nudge, well, God, I've always wanted to do my own thing. And honestly, it kind of turned into borderline survival mode. But I've just done a lot through those 3 years with the full intention, or now almost 4, of doing my own thing. And so I don't have a short answer. There's a lot. We've painted houses. I have a real estate license, a small renovation companies. I do things with the markets. I even still work part-time right now at my wife's company doing some utility engineering design, and there's a lot. But the beauty of it was it opened the door for me to do not just the fun traveling, but to have the eye for serving and doing missions trips and just being able to say yes to God. And it's almost scary because you keep speaking things into existence. Like you said, you think I'm making things come into existence. Like I make a plan to happen. What it is just speaking into existence. And all of a sudden God hears and he's like, oh, you want to do this? I prayed for years. I said, God, it's the same thing people do with tithing. I'll start giving when I get rich, right? Took the same approach to sometimes stepping out more, serving the community more. When I have time, God. And all of a sudden I had time in this ironic way, and I don't want to give it back now. I obviously have to make a living and work, but I'm just doing it a little different. So just kind of a weird runabout answer to that.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
It's all
what
legal.
I hear is most of it's illegal. Okay.
Yeah, I was
Well,
gonna
it's funny because, so you just got back from the Canadian Rockies. My father and I had actually talked about going there, but instead we went to Switzerland, and I brought y'all Swiss chocolate. And I feel like there's excuses at this table why you're not going to eat chocolate. But
If it's not Toblerone, I won't eat
it's not Toblerone, though. Fun fact, the front of Toblerone is the picture of the Matterhorn, which is in Zermatt. You know that. So anyways.
I'm resisting another Disney joke here. So
Oh my
The Matterhorn.
gosh. Oh my gosh.
You're
All right.
Disney.
So anyways,
yeah.
Oh, man.
try it.
Okay.
Straight from
I'll try one.
Switzerland.
Say what they are.
No, it's just a.
It's
Oh,
dangerous.
this is funny for
This
you,
almost feels like.
Mr.
Right, do you have any allergies? We need to.
He's a picky. Well, all they say is when you bite into it, you see God. Let me know what you think.
God tastes good. This is
I
like
wonder if they're all
a.
the same. No, yours is
no, like
different.
caramel, maybe.
It's not caramel. It's a chocolate, a dark chocolate.
Um,
something in it.
so
I'll just
quick.
eat the rest of these.
Eat them seriously.
I might try some.
Terrible.
So some quick indulgence, and I want to hear what was cool is a lot of people may not know this, but you've spent some time in Europe, Pastor Tim, and quick indulgent recap. My father and I we flew into Geneva, really interesting city town. Saw UN. Went around Lake Geneva for church nerds. Went in the church where John Calvin preached. Went and saw the Reformation Wall. Just beautiful area. Went to Zermatt. Okay, have you been to Zermatt?
No, I didn't spend time there.
Okay,
Been through there.
my favorite little alpine town I've ever been to in my life, and it's where you take the train up to see the Matterhorn, which is one of the most iconic like mountains in the world or whatever.
I've been there. Climbed it.
Did you climb it?
I didn't
No.
climb it.
It is crazy though when you look at like the different like heights from like Smokies to Rockies to the Alps to the Himalayas. But anyway, so in fact they had like this entire like kind of mini cemetery in Zermatt where you could go and like look at all the graves of the people who died on top. It was really interesting. But just the most beautiful, like charming mountain town. The hotel we stayed at had like a train underneath in the middle of the restaurant. And I don't know about you, but for me, one of the most interesting things in those kind of towns and in those kind of travels is the people you meet. There's a cool little coffee shop I found that I just fell in love with, and the owner, I started talking to him, and I was like, "Hey, sir, were you born and raised here?" He's like, "Oh no, I'm from Buenos Aires, Argentina," and he knew the town where I'd gone to school. And I was like, "Well, how did you end up here?" He's like, "Well, I was living in Barcelona." He's like, and then I just happened to visit, and they offered me a scholarship, and so I just moved here. And you just meet the most interesting people, and you just hear the most interesting stories. And so we spent time in Zermatt, and then we went to Bern, and I think that's
Bern.
you call it Bern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bern.
I don't know why they all called it. My dad,
Bern.
they all called it Bern. You
I
call it
think it's-
Bern?
I
Is
think
that
it's-
is that how they say it?
I
in-
think it's technically pronounced Bern.
Yeah, and it was just really interesting.
I have been to Bern. Spent a couple days there.
Yeah, that's what we were texting about the Bears.
I said, are
the
the Bears
symbol is
still
a
there?
bear.
Are they still there?
Yes.
In the pit.
Yeah.
You go over there and you look
Yeah.
down and you got all the bears. See, I thought by now they would have gotten rid
No.
of the bears, like some kind of policy.
Wait, actual bears?
Yes. There's bears walking around.
They're in a little pit down in the middle of the town.
There's like a-
Do they like take care of them?
Yeah, they take care of them. It's
Yeah.
like a
Just
zoo
roaming
type.
wild.
It's almost like a non-official zoo,
It
kind
is.
of, but like people are walking around. There's like almost a
like
little
their
protective
mascot.
barrier, but I mean,
They
I got
walk-
photos and videos right
Oh,
up there.
yeah.
How many bears?
A couple usually, 3, 4, right?
We saw a couple.
Yeah, they're down in this pit, and it's what's odd is it's in the
like
very
the lion's den?
center of the. It's not an adult bookstore, okay? It's at the very.
I'm talking about.
It's at the very
Okay.
center of the town. And so you're in the center of this town, and you just come up on it and like look down in there, and they got bears, and they got kind of a habitat for them.
That's
and it's,
cool.
They're the mascot. There's a connection between the bears and Bern, Switzerland. I don't know because that's the capital.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
went and stayed there with somebody. I can't remember who it was. Stayed in one of those flats that they had, a little bit. And
Which was so interesting because I don't know, when I went to Switzerland, I was thinking Zurich would be the capital, and like literally everybody was like, "Yeah, there's not really much there." It was,
at Bern,
no, at Zurich.
Zurich, yeah.
I mean, I ended up taking a train to Zurich to fly back to the States, but I was like, oh, it's so interesting. And to me, I don't know. I don't know how you felt, but Bern felt like, okay, I've been to like parts of Europe, like Iceland and Italy, and like, but when I went there to Bern or Bern, however you say it, that was like that almost like moment where I'm like, oh, I'm in the cultural heartbeat of Central Europe. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Which Switzerland alone is crazy because it has 4 official languages. So
Yeah.
depending on where you're at, you either hear more French or more German.
Italian.
Of course, they all speak more, which, oh my gosh, the Italian. I ate more Italian food in Switzerland than I
Well,
did when
we-
I was in Italy. Because all the chefs are from
The Italian
Italy.
food is
It's,
so
people don't
good.
realize
Oh.
how close it is to northern Italy.
Yes.
And so when we were over there, after we stayed in Bern for a little bit, we were on our trip back to Italy, where my parents lived in Aviano. And so I remember this. We we were riding back.
You sent me the map. It was funny. I was 4 hours from your old home.
Oh, that was the other way. That was from my old house. But we were traveling back, and I mean, this was a funny experience. We're in my parents' minivan. It's like a van again. I don't remember what it was, and we're driving. We're driving from Bern down to Italy, northern Italy, and you're going through all the mountains, like you're seeing them all, and we're coming down the mountains, and there are switchbacks, like legit switchbacks all the way down, and it's like steep, and we're like halfway down, and you're like, what's that smell? Oh, that's the brakes. And we were like, oh, please let our brakes not give out. I mean, it was so crazy. And then they had a cool experience from there across. So once you got down to and through parts of the mountains, the best way to travel was by train. And so you drive your vehicle. We drove our vehicle. They have a loading place. And so we loaded our van onto this platform on a train, and then you stay inside of your vehicle while you're sitting on this train, taking the rest of the way across from Switzerland to Italy. And so you're just sitting in your vehicle.
It's
and
like a ferry.
You got the Alps over on one side and all this, and you're just kind of going, and that's the best way to, at least this was 20 years ago, to travel through there. It was cool.
It is crazy how much you could just go from country to country through train in Europe.
Oh, yeah.
I think more than anything, I was struck, you know this, and we talk about this, but I was struck more than I think I ever have been, how much of a disadvantage I think we're at in America culturally and linguistically.
Horribly.
Because
of how big we are, like geographically.
Just because, like, I mean, and we know this, but I heard several people there point it out. They're like, if you're in Europe, Europe's almost like a country with states.
Yeah.
Or we're almost like a continent.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the UN. Or the EU, I mean.
Yeah, so it's like you're a few hours from another country that may have or 10 minutes from another country.
From France.
Yeah. So you're from another country that might have either a very different culture than you or a diametrically opposed culture than you, and will most likely speak a different language than you. And so just geographically, if you're born in Europe, it forces you to be multilingual.
Yeah.
And it forces you to be multicultural. It forces you to have a little bit more of a global perspective.
Yeah.
And you know, it's funny. Somebody asked me they're like, if all you're traveling, does it make you just want to live overseas? I was like, no. Ironically, the more I travel, the more I want to travel and see the rest of the world. But also, the more I really am like, no. I mean, I love that I live here. Yeah. I don't want to live anywhere else.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm like, man, it does really put us at a disadvantage. Like, you don't meet anybody over there that doesn't speak at least 3 languages.
Yeah.
Well, it'd be like speaking Pennsylvania. And Indiana.
Yeah.
Kentucky.
And maybe Michigan, but we wouldn't do that.
No.
My one thing that we've got to bring from Europe is the alfresco experience. Oh, my gosh. When you're just like the eating and dining experience outside and the spaciousness of it's just, it's so
good food.
And they spend hours doing the food's good.
Yeah.
Did you eat in France? Did you like it?
I did. So, yeah, we took a train to Chamonix one day. Have you been there? A little mountain town. Beautiful. And it was really good. I honestly ate Italian most of the time.
Did you?
We went to one
Italian food over there is not necessarily like Italian here. Did you think it was?
Not necessarily. It's nothing like it.
No.
That's what
I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, real Italian food.
Hold on,
is
here's
not
a funny
like,
story. We were traveling, and we had, I think at the time, we had Lauren, who was, I think she was like 9 months old. And so we went to an Italian restaurant, and we were trying to find something for her to eat. Or she might have been a little bit older than that. It was like, and so couldn't find it on the menu what we wanted because it's totally different. And so we were trying to ask them if they had something like fettuccine Alfredo. And the look on their face was, you're like trying to explain it, and they're just like, no. No, we don't have that. And you're like, what? That's the most common Italian food.
No spaghetti and meatballs?
No, and it's like, Their pizza was quite different too.
Yeah.
Yes,
but-
it is.
So yeah, when it comes to Italian, I'm a very like quality over quantity person.
Oh.
Like Mexican, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Honestly, it doesn't matter the quality. I
that's
can eat
pretty
Mexican all day.
racist.
But when it comes to Italian, I think it's because it's so heavy. I could only have it
Yeah.
American
Yeah.
Italian like once a month, and I'm like, and it's got to be good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there, oh my gosh, the spaghetti carbonara, like the quattro formaggi pizza, the 4 cheeses, I melted. I went to heaven. It was
Literally, you
amazing.
melted in a bed of cheese. And
Melted in better cheese. No,
And
we went to
went to
one
heaven.
we had one indulgent meal because Switzerland is freaking expensive. Oh my gosh.
yeah.
But it's interesting. Like we had one like Swiss, authentic, traditional Swiss meal, but most of it was either like a German meal or a French meal or an Italian meal. It's
What
just
was the
because they're
authentic?
um,
Is it more
like schnitzels
Ah,
and
that's
like
German.
certain. Yeah, but
It's almost like
the Swiss house, it
Bavarian.
was a very
They're very similar. I think
It's very
the Swiss
similar.
is very similar to German.
Yeah.
in
yeah
the food.
tenderloins, mustard
Yep.
sauces.
Yep.
It was really good, but
Rumpsteak. Did you have rumpsteak?
I don't remember. Feels like I
Yes.
should.
I want you
They
to
have
say
lots of schnitzels.
Rumpsteak.
Rumpsteak. Wiener Schnitzel.
Oh yeah.
Currywurst.
And I had the sausages.
I just like
okay.
it.
You
I
know
just
what?
like hearing you talking German.
You know what
Can
I
you
ended
talk
up-
in German the rest of
Okay.
this podcast?
Speaking of German.
Currywurst
fluent.
mit Pommes frites.
Whoa, sounds like an angel death.
Eine grosse
Let me
Bier.
tell you something. You know what I ended
Figure
up
that
doing?
one
Yeah. You know what I ended up doing? 2 days ago, I finally, as often as I go to German Village, I've never been to Schmitz.
Oh yeah.
It's like the
You ever been to
iconic.
Schmitz?
It is.
I know.
Yeah.
And I went and I got their
Cream
whole
puffs.
sausage platter.
Dude, do you ever
Oh.
do the buffet?
No.
It's intimidating. It's like
Yeah.
a once
Yeah.
ever.
I
and you're
need to.
done.
Was it good?
Okay.
Did you like
So
it?
anyways.
Well,
So anyways.
give us a quick review.
Food's
Do you
good.
love it?
The buffet is just a
German-
lot.
Schmitz.
It was
yeah.
pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was pretty good. Yeah, I liked it. I'd go back. It was okay.
That was not convincing.
The sausage was good.
Honestly, my favorite food was in the stands on the road, like not the restaurants.
Yeah.
Like
Street
those, the
food.
food on the stands.
Did you go
like
to
they
Interlaken?
do- Huh?
You go to Interlaken?
Interlaken,
They had
where
like
they had
several
to-
stands of. Never mind.
No, just they'd have them like different places. You go in Germany, they'd have like on main routes, and they'd have like these stands that are out there, and you could just pull your car right over, and you walk right up to the stand. Like people pull over and get it.
Did I
And
ever,
they'd have right there, and it was so good.
did I ever tell you about the time I was in Florence and I paid a lot of money for a gelato?
Is it good?
Uh,
Worth it?
Not this much. So we're in Florence, and there's little gelato places everywhere, and you picture 21-year-old Zach popping into one of these things, and I don't know much Italian, and I'm just trying to connect culturally, and so you walk up and you go, "Quanta costa?" Like how much, and you're pointing at the gelato thing and like the size, and he looks at me. I swear he's like, I swear he's looking at me, and he looks at the sign and he goes, 20 euro.
20 euro?
Oh man, and that
Oh,
was
that's expensive gelato.
And
yeah.
I was like,
Holy cow!
and I just gave him the money, and I was like, I just paid like $30 for this gelato, and it was a pistachio gelato. It was good.
Oh, I thought you were going to say
But
you
it
actually
wasn't like-
bought like a vat of it.
Yeah.
No, it was
Oh,
just a
for
cone.
20
It was just a
euros.
little cone
For 20
Dang.
euro.
for 20
You were
euro.
too
yeah,
off.
and that was
Yeah.
you said a little while ago.
Was it euro
Yeah.
mostly? Or
No,
was it
so
francs?
they only do
Swiss
Swiss
francs?
francs.
Yeah.
Yep.
See, they don't participate, do they?
Which screwed me up when I went to France.
Yeah, because it's more euros.
Mm-hmm.
When I
Well,
was
that-
there, the euro coin wasn't in existence.
Yeah.
This is back in the 30s.
Yep,
Well,
1930s.
when it comes to currencies, that
euro,
that's
euro wasn't the
Switzerland's-
common thing.
That's their world, the banking system.
Mhm.
So they so
Swiss francs.
Switzerland is so interesting. I was telling you, like, I was looking up like the average salary there's like $200,000. Like, it is crazy to live there, an expensive place. Anyways,
Save the rest of these for Lydia.
okay. Barron was great. I got to give a shout out quickly to my hometown because we're walking down Barron, and one of the first things I saw, I nerded out. I think I sent a picture to y'all. Einstein's old house,
Yep.
right there.
Yeah.
So I paid 7 Swiss francs and just toured all of Einstein's house, watched the 20-minute documentary. Didn't even after watching Oppenheimer, which I finally convinced my dad to watch on the way back on the plane.
That doesn't
I
really
was
say
like,
much about
oh man, like
Einstein.
I didn't even really for him to be a security threat. And just all of the things, it was just fascinating. But anyways, we're walking through, looking at my dad's like, well, like Einstein was always in Greenville. It's my hometown, Greenville, South Carolina. I was like, wait, for real? He's like, yeah. Einstein's son either studied there, did work there, and so it's known Albert Einstein was always visiting Greenville, South Carolina. So it was my fun little claim to fame. Anyways, I loved Barron. Then we spent time in Lucerne, and it was just beautiful, beautiful modern Swiss town. But anyways, while we're there, especially in Bern, and I'm hearing all these German voices and accents, and I just start looking up because, like you mentioned, I think on one of the past podcasts, it is a very different feeling historically when you're in Europe than when you're in the States. Where all you been in Europe?
Not a whole lot. Ireland, England, Scotland, and Italy,
Yeah,
Greece.
yeah. I mean, everything's hundreds of years old, and
Yeah.
and we're looking at places, and I'm starting to just Google, refresh my memory, like where did Hitler invade? Where did all these things happen? Because there's been a lot come out, and when you think of Switzerland, a lot of times you think of that phrase, like I'm Switzerland, which means I'm neutral. But there's actually been a lot coming out recently about the collusion that the Swiss government had with the Nazis and the Third
they
Reich.
stored all their treasure.
Yeah, it's where they store all their treasure. And it just got me thinking about the whole neutral thing. Your father and I had a fun breakfast or lunch, something a couple months ago, talking about the whole isolationism thing. We've broached the subject here on the podcast, but I just thought we've not actually taken any time to talk through this whole idea of, I think, the term probably became really popular back in the 30s with the creation of America First, of people not wanting to go into war, of America should not ever be involved in the affairs of other nations. And even the term isolationism has different meanings and context. I was watching a YouTube video of a guy that's not from America talking about, you Americans define isolationism different than the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Y'all just think it means you shouldn't invade other countries. And he's like, we think that's a given.
Yeah, there's kind of a reason for that, though. I think going back to the 30s, because you had Roosevelt, who he was at the time, like as you were saying, I think coming out of, we were talking about this World War I, in the fallout of World War I, and then you got to think about here in America what we experienced out of World War I because of the impact of it was the Great Depression.
Yes.
And so when you kind of are part of an international conflict like that, not only do you lose tens of thousands of men, but then you turn around and your country is decimated and economically, you can see kind of why there was this rise of we should not be involved in all this stuff.
Well,
And you had Roosevelt in 1933 that was really trying to kind of pitch. So the idea of a version of isolationism was to not be involved except for against aggressive entities. And so he tried to actually pitch something, I believe it was in 1933, and Congress all turned it down.
Well, and for what it's worth, World War I started probably, I think it was around 1914, and we didn't really commit to it till about 1917 because the country, even as a whole, still had a big stance. That was kind of the mindset that this is going on in Europe. And what was it? I can never say the word, the Lusitania, a couple of the ships that got sunk.
Thinking of the Lusitania.
Yeah. Eventually kind of triggered us into that same mindset.
German U-boats.
Yeah.
Feeling like they weren't going to end the war if we didn't get involved in World War I. So
Good movie on that, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, you went and saw it about 2 weeks ago.
Oh.
Anyways,
okay.
we can move on.
That was a great movie.
Yep.
But I do know the U.S. they were fighting not to get in it. And
I also think that you have to look back historically too, because after the Revolutionary War happened, George Washington is elected president. He even said there were several things he did as he was stepping away from presidency. He's the one who, there was no term limits whenever he was elected president.
Right.
He volunteered to
Yeah.
step down after 8 years. So that was one thing he did. Another important piece of doctrine that he set in place as he was leaving the presidency was a stance of neutrality in most foreign affairs. So you can even trace roots of isolationism back to the beginning roots of our country and George Washington as a president. And so it's not without precedent.
It seems like
this country's
for me when I
had
think about
isolationist stance.
the history, going back to that, and then think about the last century, and then I think about again the U.S.'s stance was trying to avoid the conflict, right? Gets involved in the conflict, repercussions of that are pretty rough back home for the next 2 decades, right? Then you have another conflict break out with World War II. I mean, when you get access of allies and you get Germany and what it's doing, the U.S. trying to stay out of it really until December 7th, 1941. And the moment we were bombed by Pearl Harbor there by Japan, we immediately then retaliated and jumped into it. What's interesting is to see the difference between what happened after World War I and World War II.
Yeah.
Because what happened after World War II is that we did very well economically. In fact, that's one reason why you have boomers and you've got this generation where they all started having lots of kids is because you could financially afford it. So what's interesting is the Second World War ended up being financially very viable. It ended up creating really good things back home that the First World War did not. So you wonder if some of that began to change a little bit of the psyche and the perspective of Americans when it comes to the involvement in foreign affairs. And then you kind of lead right into, Vietnam. Well, you have Korean War, which also wasn't a great situation. Then you have, think about the big conflicts. Then you have Vietnam War, where here we are now in a war that a lot of people here thought was absolutely pointless, that we couldn't win. You have all the protests happening. So it kind of just a resurgence of people that are just saying, why are we over here fighting in this conflict? And then you can just follow from there to the Cold War between the U.S. and Russia into the 90s. And then you've got 9/11. And 9/11, I think all of these major events are the things that tend to trigger these kind of like, what are we going to do? And then for the last, we could say 20 plus years, we've been heavily involved in everywhere from the Middle East to Afghanistan, not to mention other conflicts all over the globe. But by the way, I want to point this out, and I got this from somebody who was really brilliant. We were talking to like probably a year and a half ago. The big problem we have today is that there is no real U.S. foreign policy. There is no playbook. There used to be. But I think since like the 80s, 70s or 80s, there was actually a playbook that ended up basically getting resolved or to whatever they did. I can't remember there was a name for it. I don't remember, but there'd be history buffs who would know. But since then, we literally for the last 30 years have not had a foreign policy playbook. So it's whichever administration gets in the office, whichever Congress and how they feel is. So we're here, we're there, we're helping here. Should we help there? Should we not help there? Nobody knows because there is no. Go back to George Washington. There was a foreign policy. There's no foreign policy in America right now.
Other nations are literally sitting and waiting based on election cycles. They'll geopolitical activity will stop and wait. They know we're going to election year this year, and they'll wait and play their cards based off the next potential shift.
People do that here as well. Economically.
So Zach, should we be involved?
Should we be involved? That's a very broad question. Should we be involved?
Yes
in what?
or no? You're an interventionist or an isolationist?
Or we say an internationalist.
An internationalist
or
or
isolationist.
Not. I think there's lots of questions you got to answer before you can say that we should be.
Sounds like you're
involved.
dodging.
No, I'm not dodging.
You're dodging.
No, I'm not dodging.
Well, because even a healthy or responsible interventionist would say limited, strong involvement. So even your most responsible, there's really hawkish people that just want war everywhere. But your typical responsible interventionist would say limited.
Yeah.
And they would say, well, yes, obviously there's questions you have to answer and blah, 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 blah. But they would still say at the end of the day, yes, there are moments you should be involved.
Yep.
Would you say that?
Yes. That's how I would define myself. I think that even through probably the last 12 to 18 months, I've even become more limited in my scope, closer to the isolationist viewpoint than maybe what I had been in previous years. I just think that, and these are things that, just things to consider. First of all, we have, $33 trillion in national debt right now. And so there's a lot of money that's being spent on things outside of this country. And the question is, what benefit does our involvement in these things have to do with our country? I think there.
Hold on, real pause. Do you remember when the infrastructure bill was first being put out there? The one, not the infrastructure local, but what was the bill that was? It was last fall that I think got approved. That had all the international aid and all this. I just remember it was a year ago. I remember looking through it and going, wait, we're giving $9 billion to that country in Africa? Wait, what's that one for?
No.
We're giving $15 billion to this. You just add up and you're like, whoa, I had no clue.
Now, perspective, compared to our total budget, we spend $113 billion on just it's like the chamber of,
Clips.
we spend so much money in so many different places. I don't even think our government knows how much money we're spending on different.
We all agree on that.
So what we're giving to some of these countries is literally pennies of our national
Is
budget.
it really though?
Billions?
Yes.
Is it really pennies?
When you're talking about billions, that's not pennies.
When we talked about, like, on our previous podcast where you got Professor Galloway going, if you took $1 billion and you split it in the top 500
No, I
institutions,
agree with you.
then you had them do this, that we could cut down in half in 10 years. And, like, I don't think we should think that $9 billion or whatever is not a lot of money.
No. I agree with you. I'm not trying to argue
You
that.
can share it with the United States.
I am-
Some of us will be okay.
I'm just giving perspective.
No, I understand that the scope of what they're dealing with and is huge. I
Yep.
get that, but I think those are some shock. I think there are a lot of Americans that would be really surprised, and we are surprised sometimes when you see how much money is being allocated and given to places, and you're like, wait, I didn't know anything was going on there. What are we doing there? Mm-hmm. We're just not aware.
Yeah.
Maybe that's our fault, but I don't feel like I don't feel like in any regards the government is educating us on why we're spending this. I think it's out there if you want to go find it.
Yeah.
And there's professors who do, but
Stu?
I'm with Zach. Now. You got to specify when you talk about isolationism.
Yeah.
When it comes to, I just set aside as free market. You have to have trade and all that. Sounds like we're more talking about the act of war, the more aggressive nature of it.
And sorry, and that's what I meant earlier when I said it was funny listening to a non-American talk earlier. He's like, the way you guys define
You have
isolation.
to have a foundation.
He said isolationism to us is we're going to build 10-foot fences and keep everybody out and not trade with anybody.
No
trade,
He said,
no
y'all for isolation, it's
outside.
just not invading other countries. What's wrong with y'all?
Yeah.
It's like,
It
and we
really
won't build
is.
anything.
Yeah. And that defines, sending money, sending resources. How does that all align into the grand scope of isolation? I love the World War II point, how that was a shift and how things changed. And it almost seemed like we had a stance, like you said, and we saw a Second World War is like fool us once, shame on you, fool us twice would be shame on us, and we're not going to let this happen again. And so we took what seemed like a world police stance, and we stayed through that, I'd say, for the most part, until maybe Vietnam or something, when things started getting confusing, because it's like, what are we now fighting? People started questioning, what are we now fighting for? And then it's just been a blur. So I used to lean more towards that aspect, I think, of the world police, the intervention, and a lot more lately I'm going with what Zach said and kind of bunkering down into this more isolated role. And, it's one of those things as a Christian and stuff too, it's this constant dilemma too of what, what is our calling of right and what is our calling of wrong. So it's I'll tell you, I'm a 50-50. I'm in the middle place. That's why I love these conversations, because I'm so open to trying to understand fully what is the stance.
Yeah. No, that's good.
I think there's a question to also ask, because I think what really prompted this conversation, not only the trip you took, and Stu, I know you've taken one recently, but I think part of what's prompted this is we're talking about this as a nation with the amount of money that is being spent to bring aid to Ukraine and to Gaza, over in Israel, I guess, in the conflict with Gaza. And I think, those are very different scenarios, obviously, but I guess the question really comes, there's a moral question, so I think that is one that I think let's pause on that. We can ask that, because I think there's a good conversation to have about, do we feel that there is a moral obligation, and maybe not just America, like we're Americans, so we're having this conversation, but should other, can I say, global powers, or, it seems like when you look at things holistically from the entire globe, when you look at all the different nations, you can probably draw a line somewhere and go, these are the haves and these are the have-nots. I mean, there's obviously it's a scale, but the haves and have-nots, and there's so much. The question is, when you ask that, is should there be responsibility for the haves, for the people on one end? I mean, think about scenarios. Okay, the U.S. isn't going to be involved. I know we're talking about wars and conflicts, but let's think about the production of vaccines.
Yeah.
Let's think about, production, whether there's a COVID, whatever you believe about that, but other vaccines that it's like, making it available because there's an outbreak of Ebola in this place and they don't have them. And if we don't get them there, I mean, this is what I'm trying to say. There's some ties to this,
Mm-hmm.
right? The global economy as well as the global infrastructure is so small now
Yeah.
that if we don't address a viral breakout
Yes.
over in Africa, South America, Asia, wherever, it's our problem.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all of us lived through COVID.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
pretty obvious, right? And so
Yeah.
I think there's a question about like morality. There's a question about then I would just want to say like practicality.
Yeah.
Is there an argument for America being involved globally, not from the moral standpoint, but I want to just say from the
Practicality.
other's perspective?
I mean, for
Well, then that's for me is more to Zach. That'd be a no. Just the longevity of being able to spend money and operate, and
You said for you that'd be a no.
So you're saying
From the
you're saying from
practicality.
political or from a military standpoint, you're saying you're 50-50. From
well, take morals. So with the morals
Okay.
involved, that's where I had the limit. With morals off,
Yep.
where we stand on
That's
how
fine.
we should. When the practicality side,
okay,
as an American stance, it would
you
be a
think we
no-
should
just a
not.
no.
So that would include vaccines to other countries that don't have them, and there's an outbreak. Like
Yeah.
my scenario, I'm just talking about the COVID,
Yeah.
or a version
and
of that.
And a lot of that kind of strays just with just a more free market stance of just a little less federal intervention just as a whole. So that
More of an evolutionary
yeah,
standpoint.
more of just letting letting natural markets things take
But
care
isn't-
of
but
themselves.
isn't that-
A lot
isn't
they
that-
share.
Yeah.
Isn't that an
well,
evolutionary standpoint? I'm not saying evolution.
Yeah,
as
you said
in-
natural. I thought you were going to say.
No,
No, it's more organic would be a better.
Okay,
word.
but I am trying to draw a connection there because, right, isn't that a little bit more? Because I think this is where you get into the question of is there a moral responsibility? Again, you gotta answer a lot of questions about morality in that.
yeah.
Versus, want to say a non-moral, I'd say you could make an argument, which I feel like you're kind of doing, but would never from this position. That's the evolutionary standpoint, which is if you don't survive, you don't survive. That's
And-
not
and
my
it's-
problem.
yeah.
That's survival of the fittest. I'm not going to help out.
Yeah. In a sense, yes. Again,
Right?
a moral.
I'm not saying you
reviewed
believe in
view,
evolution.
yeah.
I'm just saying
Just
that is the mindset of I'm not going to be
from
involved.
markets, a laissez-faire from a
Sure,
markets. A business
sure.
will go out of business if a government doesn't subsidize farming.
I
there won't be
understand the
farmers.
economics of that.
Yeah.
I understand. It's a market control. It controls itself,
Yeah.
and it will.
So that would be So it would lean evolution. If this country fails to meet, boom, it'll just naturally. So, but I was just hinging on the word practicality. Can the
after
U.S. fix all that? Can the U.S. constantly pump out vaccines? Can we put troops in every country? And from that, from a shell, from the moralities being gone, I just think that is impossible feat.
yeah, and to add to that, I think the one thing you have to think about is we can't solve everyone's problems, right? Like if you solve everyone's problems, then they're never going to figure it out themselves. You wouldn't do this with your 16-year-old kid. You wouldn't do this with your 20-year-old kid. So
But
why,
would you help your 16-year-old kid if they had a crisis?
Yeah, where this,
I think there's a.
where
To
this
me,
breaks
there's a.
down. Yeah.
I have a problem with the idea of a generic just solve everybody's problems because I think
Yeah.
that's language that is used, but I don't think it's intellectually honest. Because I think there's a difference between America getting involved in a crisis. You have a coup happening in this place that maybe disrupts the balance structure of the entire continent. You have, I'm just saying politically why we might get involved in
Yeah.
things. There's a difference between, there's a famine, and if someone doesn't bring food,
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
natural disaster. If someone doesn't show up, people are starving to death.
Which-
There's a
Yeah.
difference
That is
between
the
that and getting involved and going, oh, they struggle financially as a nation. We're just going to pump money to them.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Because
Yes.
people use that
That's
as
what
a
I'm
weapon,
referring to.
like,
Yeah.
politically here. Like some people will say, well, you should never help the poor because if you don't,
Yeah.
if they
Yeah.
don't help themselves,
That's a dangerous stance.
because really, I mean, we're talking practically, but also ethically. Because
Yeah.
the bottom line, here's what it comes down to: is America, for better or worse, is in a unique global position where economically and militarily we are postured, and there's of course debate right now with China and other ones on the rise, but we are still in a unique posture in the world. So the question is, what, if any, is our responsibility in that? And I do think it's interesting because when we alleviate suffering, people do not get mad. When we feed, when we deliver vaccines to continents that might otherwise not have them, there's not anger. But if we, and again, this, I am completely coming out and saying that, like, America has done a lot of things wrong and egregiously. We've been on the wrong side of history on some things. I mean, there's plenty of imperfections. But as a leader of what people would call the free world, on the other hand, when you get away from disease and famine and all that, and you get into military positions, do we have a responsibility there? I mean, I'm just going to be honest. In 2015, when ISIS took over a big part of, Syria and Iraq, I remember to an unhealthy degree being on the edge of my seat when ISIS had a village trapped of Kurds in the mountains. There was about to be a mass
the Turkish
butcher. I mean, of rape and murder and torture of tens of thousands of people. And the side of me that's a follower of Jesus, but also that just side of me, I gotta be honest, when I finally saw that we took some helicopters over there and took care of it,
and you went, yay.
I went, oh, I mean, there is that, I'm just gonna be honest, almost like that cinematic side of me. It's like, thank God.
Yeah.
That we just saved those tens of thousands. I mean, so but then it gets tricky when the geopolitical situation is a little bit messier, but it does come down to what is and we can't solve all the world's problems. But I think some people take that and they go to the other extreme that we should never. And I just think that's and they're like, we need to solve our problems first. Well, hello, until America's made of human beings, which means it's always going to be imperfect and we're always going to have problems.
Yeah.
So I think to never get involved is just a naive and a selfish posture.
Yep. But to your point, and I'm not saying I disagree with your, we went over there and took care of ISIS and did all that. But doesn't that perpetuate the cycle a little bit?
What do you mean?
We go over there, we take care of ISIS, wipe them out. Doesn't that perpetuate the narrative in the minds of the extremists and the jihadists, or in any type of thing, that America is this evil, and therefore it continues a cycle of hate into the next generation that would continue to rise up and hate against America and continue to fight. And so it's almost like the Greek Hydra argument: cut off one head, another one's going to appear. Like, by continuing to be involved, are you not just continuing to create more and more problems that if you solve the first one, you got to continue? Like, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I got several thoughts
like
to that.
crime
I think there's a grade of that, right? So does that moment of destroying the terrorists, I'm just going to be honest, I am a hopeless optimist at heart. But I think that, and this is not directed towards you, but I think there are people that when they look at Islamic extremism, they do not understand how pervasive and ancient that ideology is that perpetuates that hate. And they're going to hate, let's say, the quote unquote, this is not towards all Muslims. I'm talking about terrorism.
Yeah.
They will hate the infidel no matter what. So in that particular instance, I don't see it. But to your point, I do agree. I think, look, when we invade all of Iraq based on false notions of weapons of mass destruction, and we get
not once,
unhealthily entangled in situations that aren't ours, and then we have Abu Ghraib, and then we have all of these atrocious acts committed by a few soldiers, and then we get... Do those, or let's just be honest, not to get all into Israel Hamas right now, but do I think what the assault, wherever you land on it, do I think the assault on Gaza right now is going to perpetuate? Absolutely. So I do think there's danger in what you say. I think there's a grade of it. I think when we don't use wisdom or discretion in how we do it, it's multiplicative. But I also would go back to another argument. I think, like, it's so cheesy. It's one of those horrible, cheesy preacher jokes that people will use, but it's so true about, the person's walking along the shore and there's a starfish and they grab the starfish and they throw him back in. And the daughter is like, "Oh, Dad, there's thousands. What did you do?" And it doesn't matter. He's like, "Well, it mattered to that one."
Yeah.
So there's a part of me that's like, are we ever going to solve humanity's evil on this side of the planet, especially through military? Absolutely not.
Well,
But if it's staring us right in the face, I don't know that we can use that argument to not save that group of innocent people.
yeah. When it comes to innocent lives, I think it's an easier conversation, something like mass genocide. But when it comes to understanding certain conflicts, it gets a little, so use Afghanistan as an example.
Yeah.
When Russia was invading Afghanistan, we
Mhm.
were supporting bin Laden and Al Qaeda because Russia was the aggressor. They were bad. They were coming, and then years go by, and now all of a sudden that's the enemy we're fighting, because we're very quick to like kind of. If you go to parts of Ethiopia, there's been a war going on in Ethiopia the past year or so, since me and Pastor Steve had traveled there. It was last April, so it's only been a year. And so in that conflict, they told us there, it's not even the Muslims and Christians that are killing each other. It's Christian versus Christian, different tribe,
Wow.
or Muslim versus Muslim. And so while we were there, it got a little tense, but it's actually a different, it's such ancient conflicts that we don't fully understand. So in a situation like that, where do we step in? The war this past year is from two internal tribes were fighting the north. That war came to a cease, which they believe there was mass genocide, but no one's really looking into it. But Sudan next door, everybody's got Sudan's attention. So all of a sudden, these two forces are now fighting each other. So as a U.S., wanting to stop innocent lives getting killed, how do you step into situations like that where and that happens a lot where we
Yes,
don't
I
understand the
Yes, what
the
happened?
heart.
Yeah,
I think just you brought up a good point, like mentioning Afghanistan, but I think one of the challenges that we have, and I think one of the things that we're exposing is the complexity of this.
Yes.
Like, should we be in that one, but not this one? And
Yeah,
and it all
exactly.
depends on who happens to be in control of Congress and the the president's office when these happen, right?
Yeah.
Or today, let's be honest, I think it probably was a lot easier to police or let me just say, have your own foreign policy as a president or as a nation before social media and media made everything.
Oh,
Like now you can't. Now it's like, yeah, we're
Twitter.
not going to get involved. Protests everywhere because we're not involved, or we're
Yeah.
involved, and protests everywhere. And so all of a sudden now there's this
Yeah.
pressure from within that we never had before.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about a couple of thoughts came to my mind when you mentioned that. It gets really, really complicated, right? When you're trying to talk about because you keep bringing in, well, we all do, the moral argument. When you're talking about
Yeah,
innocent
it's
lives,
tough.
right? It gets really complicated when we're never really sure who the villain is.
Yeah.
I think these are the conflicts that go, I think for the most part, there's been, other than political reasons, let's take the two conflicts that are on the table right now that the U.S. is sending the most money and munitions to.
yeah.
Ukraine, there's probably been the most support from within the United States to help them. Why? They're invaded by Russia, who's seen as the big bad, monster. That the U.S. has had trouble with Russia. That was unprovoked. In other words, there wasn't conflict and then doing something. Russia just lines up and decides that we're going to come move in and start taking over. So
And because they're a democracy.
and so and so there's more support. I'm not saying it's waned.
I'm not
and it's
saying I
like this is
disagree with
going
you.
on, but
Let me interject. I'm not saying I disagree with you. There's a lot of people who
'cause
don't
of-
hold that belief.
Oh, I know.
but
Oh, I know.
I don't. Yeah. Okay, that's a different conversation.
And I think
but
it's based on
understand.
a whole lot of misunderstandings.
I'm just saying. I'm not saying I disagree with you. I just wanted to interject that point.
Sidebar. Now, but then you have the Israel-Gaza conflict. And so, at first there's probably, and there wasn't even, let's be honest, there wasn't a ton of support for Israel. There was some initially. There was a little concern. I'm talking about America. When it first happened, October 7th, it was like, but even immediately, the moment they went to respond, there was a huge reaction. And because that's got a much longer story and with Palestine and all that. And so what do you see today? Protests. We talked about those in a podcast of all this stuff going on of support for Gaza.
Yeah.
Right? And so now you're just like, well, who's the big bad wolf? Who's the villain? And I think it's it gets really confusing. I mean,
Yeah.
even you mentioned Afghanistan, right? You talk about it from the Soviet-Afghan War in 1979, that kind of angle to begin with. But then you turn around and we get attacked,
Yeah.
9/11.
It's
We trace it, interestingly enough, through Iraq, as you guys mentioned, no weapons of mass destruction, but we ought to stay there because there's a lot of oil. So let's
Yeah.
establish our presence and stay
then
there.
leave abruptly in a day.
What we have found, no, we're talking about, yeah, but what we have found, this is why. What we have found as a country is that when we go spend the investment to go in and do a conflict in there, it's
Yes.
to our best interest to stay there.
Yeah.
yeah.
Whether it's financial, whether it's for policing things,
Yeah.
for having a base there, presence there. I mean, this. I
Yeah.
trust
But
me.
we're
I
not
lived
reaping a
over
lot
on
of the
bases in Germany.
finances.
Where do you think all these bases in Germany came from? That's why I lived over
You
there.
know,
They came after World War II.
There's a difference between imperialism and isolation.
Correct.
Yeah.
Sure.
If we're going to take
But they're not.
Iraq and
But,
take
well,
oil,
hold on. No, I agree with
Yeah.
you. I would agree with you. I don't think our posture has been imperialism.
Yeah.
I would disagree in that. When I look at Europe, I was over there with bases. There was no sense
Well-
of the U.S. taking over
agree.
or in this. They wanted to maintain their presence. I think. Here's what I'm saying. I don't think the United States does anything for altruistic purposes.
Yeah.
No.
Well,
They're doing-
I'm saying though, without the
You don't think so?
concept,
No,
the
I
ancient
don't.
concept of imperialism,
don't.
that's where I think it's unsustainable because we're not actually, we're given, and there's no keeping
Yes.
soldiers in Afghanistan
Sure.
doesn't.
And then Afghanistan.
If we
is
don't do anything for altruistic purposes, what was the political agenda of, I mean, just wasting away hundreds of millions of dollars of ammunition to save that random tribe up in? I don't disagree with you that I don't think any government on
I'm
the
saying
planet
I
doesn't
don't
have
think
an
it was
agenda.
just. I feel bad for them. I think that they connect all of this. If we allow this to go on, if we
Sure.
don't take them
Destabilize
out,
the
I'm telling you,
region.
I
I think there's. I'm not saying.
I don't just think
totally-
America's just like, oh, what would be lovely
That's
to
what
do
I'm
today?
saying.
I understand.
think that there's a thought. I mean, look at, and you get Afghanistan, where we go in pursuit of Osama bin Laden. Only reason we were supposed to be over there, right, was to go in and do this. Next thing you know, we're there for 20 years, and we're setting up a police state to really help because of the Taliban. The justification. Here's the justification. If we don't stop the Taliban or get rid of them, they're just going to come back. It was out of the
Yes.
source that we were attacked. 20 years later, we finally go, it's time to leave.
They
Is
all
that
come
the
back.
right thing to do? We pull out in a day, pretty much,
Yeah.
and you see Taliban come back in and reinforce all of their crazy rules, and it is just
Well, to your
a
point,
complicated mess.
To your point, if you're going to be involved, and I feel like you're trying to make this too. I just want it to be heard. Like, if we are going to be somewhere, then if we're going to make that choice to spend our money, resources, troops, effort, then why would our mindset not be we're going to go in, take it over, use the natural resources, things that are there, so it does benefit America as a nation.
Amen. It's an
That's-
evolutionary mindset.
see?
I'm not saying we should. Evolutionary
That's what
mindset
I'm-
I'm not
was
saying we should. I'm
that's-
just saying
Because
is
it's
that it?
unsustainable without it. We won't be able to always fight all these wars if we don't start getting something back. That's why
Sure.
I understand people don't want to take the stance of it. And that's why I'm the weirdest
It's-
thing. If
it's
I'm not an
gross feeling.
imperialist, then you gotta let me be an.
You know what I've
it's gross
realized?
feeling.
You are a libertarian politically
Yeah,
and
he
a
is.
socialist at heart.
Yeah.
and they don't go together.
I would
very
say
well.
globally, I would
Socialist
still
in terms
take
of
the
your
li-
generosity.
the
Yeah.
libertarian stance
Yeah.
on a country point of view. That's kind of what in a sense when I argue. If I'm not gonna come and pillage and be an imperialist, then I'm gonna let
He's
I'm
a
gonna
pirate.
let
Here's what's up.
the country
I
sort their own
started this
messes
earlier,
out.
but what I was saying is when we go help alleviate suffering, we are the good guys.
Yeah.
If we ever make a decision to fight what could be genocide or human rights, we're seen as arrogant. It's almost impossible for America. You disagree? I mean, think about it. Whenever we help people, no one complains about that. But when what could be described from a negative connotation as place the world is the arrogance of Americans. And I'm not saying there's no merit to that.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying it
You're
puts
saying
us.
that's how the world views it.
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm saying that
they
puts
do.
us in a
Yes, that's how the world views it.
Yes, I'm saying it just puts us in a weird place.
Yes.
Because, and this isn't like woe is me, America. We got plenty of flaws and imperfections, and it's important to have these dialogues. And like you said, we should probably one day just gander at the idea of having foreign policy. But I do think that it puts us in a weird place of what do we do? And essentially, even World War I mentioned it. When you look at the economy, the economic growth from World War II, like you pointed out, and then the opposite of that after World War I. But it's been pointed out by a lot of people that, putting money aside, if we didn't have the naval support against the AFC and they had taken over Britain and then moved towards us, I mean, a lot of people, you could call it like, worst case scenario, but man, that could have set the globe back in terms of women's rights, in terms of human rights, in terms of the quality of the world. And then it's been pointed out a whole lot of times that if we didn't get involved in World War II, I mean, half of Europe or all of Europe could be speaking German. I actually listened to somebody, because it's really interesting, most of like extreme isolationism is either on the authoritarian left or the far right. And I heard somebody that was like a military analyst. They said, I wanted you to hear a speech from 2023 given by a U.S. senator about why we should not be involved in Ukraine and Russia. And it was basically like, if we don't, they need to cede this amount of land to Russia, and they just need to go ahead and make peace. And if they don't, it's going to continue to cause world economic chaos, and there's going to be more bloodshed and blah, blah, blah. And then the guy said, okay, I'm going to be honest, I was not quite forthcoming. That was actually a speech given by a U.S. senator in 1930 of why we should not be in, or 1994, why we should not be involved in World War II. And, of course, a lot of people would not like that comparison.
Yeah.
But I think there are a lot of valid comparisons because when you see for the first time since World War II era a country invading another foreign nation with a history of some pretty evil culture in the government system, I mean, that's where I'm just like, okay, there's never going to be an ideal foreign policy on a broken planet. But what's a realistic one? Should we be as involved as we are? No, but...
And maybe that's where my cynic side comes in. This has been the way the world has always functioned. There will always be a rise and fall of various empires. Now, the U.S. will be here, and one day it will be gone. And that's where...
For sure.
So to what stance can America keep doing it, I guess, until the next regime...
Yeah, it's weird because it's...
rather than preserving...
On the screen of eternity,
like
we're a blip on the radar. But in this moment in time, ethically, I mean, we can't live by fatalism, right?
So
I mean, we can't just be fatalistic.
Yeah, I don't know if I love the perspective of, well, we should try to preserve America at the expense of potentially helping someone in need in that moment, which is a little bit speaking to kind of like what you're saying approach. It's a fair conversation, but. And again, I think the tension for us at this table specifically is, I mean, I'm not saying other people don't, but I think our faith really does inform some things. And what's really hard is you have things like Jesus talking about your neighbor.
Yeah.
Who happen to be of a different ethnicity or nationality in so many ways, the Samaritan versus the Jew. And if you see him hurt on the side of the road and you pass by and do nothing.
Yeah.
Are you caring for your neighbor? And so again, I don't want to just take what is meant to be a personal call for everyone and then apply it politically across the landscape.
Yes.
But there is something to that, I guess.
Yeah,
But
well,
in a sense, I didn't want to take it too biblical, but in that same sense, Jesus came into a culture that was mad at him because Israel, for the most part, through its history, was an oppressed nation many times, and I think there was almost a reason God chose to call such a small nation that was in the highways, and they were always Egypt and Assyrians, and there was always big. He didn't call an Egypt out of it. He called such a small nation, and so Jesus came and said, and they're mad at him because he's not. That they were being truly oppressed, and he didn't. He just discarded it as not the important meat and potatoes.
Well, it wasn't his purpose.
Yeah,
It was-
His purpose was not to establish a political
Kingdom.
freedom or kingdom. That was his purpose because it was global. He was
Yeah.
thinking about Gentiles.
Yeah.
They were not. He was not there to die
So-
or to rise up and to free the Jews. He was thinking, I'm going to die for all people, including non-Jews.
Mm-hmm.
His perspective was different.
And
For that, he had a different purpose. I totally agree
And
in that regard.
I think that's hard. That it's so hard to take moralities out because then it goes. So where does then that transform to the U.S. policy?
This is the
Because
complication.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why it's
So-
so hard without the
Yes.
morality.
Yes,
because
and
it's-
this is what I was going to bring into. Where does the doctrine of separation of church and state come into play when it comes to foreign policy in this regard? Because that has been a well-established doctrine within how we operate. So,
That's not to mean that there should be there should not be any value or morality in government to
Correct.
separate. I think that's a terrible argument and
Yeah.
misuse. The separation of church and state was to protect the church from the government coming
Yeah.
and dictating. We're talking about that being flipped around in other nations where the government is dictating what they can and can't do. And so,
Yes.
to me, that's apples and oranges. That's not what we're talking about. In that regard, separation of church and state.
I understand that's how you feel.
I don't care.
There's a lot of people, though, who feel like morality
Sure.
should not be allowed to dictate any.
You're saying that morality only
Foreign
exists
policy.
within the church, then?
But
I'm saying-
morality
I'm
dictates
saying-
domestic policy. There's a reason we don't think we should murder.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying that people who maybe aren't of. Look, I agree with you. I'm just trying to argue, play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
From someone who maybe.
I'm just
doesn't
saying I
have a
don't think
faith
that
context.
I'm asking us at the table about the moral thing because of our faith. I'm not saying that every government leader should operate from our moral position, but I also don't agree with the idea that the government doesn't need to even. There's no morality in how a government operates just because there's separation of church and state. Like somehow the church is the only source of morality.
Yeah.
I think there is a morality that has nothing to do with the church.
Yeah.
If
Well-
human lives exist and we're talking about they're created and they're so
But does America as a nation have a moral
Well, that's-
obligation?
that's the question.
yeah,
to-
that's
So
the
okay, let's
magical-
just say that moral obligation to be involved. How about this? Let me phrase this. I'll give a couple scenarios and just real quick, yes or no.
Okay.
Does America, as a global power, have an obligation to get involved and help people when it comes to defending against aggressive entities? What would you say, yes or no?
I'd say no because
So no for you.
the
That's
aggressor
fine.
is always we're the aggressor in Afghanistan in a sense.
I'm not
I
saying
know-
us.
yeah.
Okay, I'll give you
Just-
Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah,
Russia and Ukraine. Russia was the aggressor.
I don't think we have.
We should not have been involved.
I don't.
Okay.
I don't think we have enough internal. There's so much with the Soviet bloc when it's separated that we can't fully, I think, from the outside, always have an opinion. I'm not saying no
should we have
indefinitely.
Okay,
I just
let me ask
think
you
we
this.
need more homework.
That's fine. Should we have been involved in World War II, in helping England and France when it comes to Germany?
When it comes, I'm telling you.
Because if we didn't get involved, that war is lost for all the rest of those nations. I
Yeah.
don't want to say that and act arrogant.
And
but if
Jews
you
are
follow-
gone, and we're speaking German.
But if you follow history, I'm just saying that's Germany
yeah,
and Russia, by the way.
when it comes to isolation, I'm pretty far over there.
You would say don't be involved against
without
aggressive
Pearl Harbor,
entities.
Yeah, I'd
If
be,
they attack us, that's different. I'm talking about
Yeah.
other people
I'm
are
pretty
attacked.
much a defense.
Defense
mindset
only?
in
Okay,
my-
what about you?
outside of economies?
Well, it's an open-ended question. So I don't know that I can say yes or no because yes.
It really wasn't. It's yes or no.
Well, okay, not open-ended, but
yes or no.
But it's okay. Sorry, not open-ended. It's a pervasive question because by saying yes, I'm saying yes in every instance.
Yeah, that's what,
Okay, so
that's
qualify your answer then. You'd say yes when?
If you're getting specifics, I'll just go ahead and say yes to Ukraine, Russia. Yes,
okay,
to
but
World War
imagine
II.
we had to have a foreign policy. So how would you dictate that and say, here's a foreign policy?
That is where foreign policy is tough because everything's so situational and circumstantial. I think.
But that's how we've been operating for the last.
But that's why we need a
30,
foreign
40
policy,
years.
right? Because
Well,
if you have a Democrat,
there's a difference between not
president-
having a foreign policy and having a basic structure from which you. I mean, let's just be honest. Everything's so fluid right now geopolitically, more than it's ever been. So there is a sense in which we have to be able to pivot and we have to be able to make decisions based on wisdom and based on strategy. So there's a difference between you never do this as a policy and we don't have any structure or strategy whatsoever. there's a difference. And I think there does have to be a foreign policy strategy.
Yes, but
Yeah.
the reason why you have a foreign policy is because we change who's in office and what their political views are all the
Which
time.
is
Right.
impossible.
So you have a Democrat in office, then you have a Republican in office, and they each have different foreign policy perspectives. The reason why having a foreign policy is that we're supposed to follow it regardless of who's in Congress and who's in the presidential office. So that's the challenge of not having that. Is it just depends on every 4 years we could be getting in it depends on who the next president is, which one we get involved or don't get involved in.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying, is there a way in your mind to define? That's why some people have tried to define this as we get involved only against
Yeah.
aggressive entities. The Russia's taking over Ukraine. We're not going to get involved in.
See, this is where I think it gets really tricky. I understand separation of church and state, and I understand, for the love of God, we are not a Christian nation. However, it is naive and inaccurate and gives you an incomplete picture if you don't realize that there are certain values that are unique out of which the soil of our nation came, and I believe out of which our nation prospers. There's a reason that freedom is a value that we think's normal, that throughout human history is an aberration. And it is because of freedom, and it is because of certain markers of free market and generosity that our nation is, for all of its faults,
Yeah.
the place that everybody on the other side of the globe wants to run to. And it is those same values that even when we don't do it out of perfect motives, and even when we get it horribly wrong in Iraq, actually postures us as a place to go and help people in the world. To get involved when there are human rights abuses so egregious. Do we do it right every time? Absolutely not. And are there a ton of, and I think you maybe even mentioned this, when it comes to Sudan, there's different places all over the world that
Korea,
are not
North
getting
Korea.
attention. I mean, even in Russia, like the
Korea.
biggest genocide right now is happening in Russia against Muslims, and we don't get involved. Are we very selective at times in what we choose to fight for? Sure. Are there perfect motives behind all that? I'm sure they're not. But for better or worse, like, we are postured that way, and there are values, and you can't separate those values from morality. So I don't think we can have a nation that is prospering and that has values like freedom, values like free market, values like human rights. We lead the way in trying to set the tone for human rights across the world. I don't think you can have all of that reality and then just cut it off and say, yep, but we shouldn't have any values when it comes to helping the rest of the world. There's no morality anymore.
Sure.
I just don't think you can do
Yeah.
that. And the question becomes when, how much, where, who. And I don't know that anybody has all the answers to that. But I don't think that means you should just never get involved in help.
So the answer is yes for you.
Well, it's not yes, because the question was, do we get involved if there's an
Well,
aggressor?
so-
and I can't say yes because that's a carte blanche. That's
Yeah.
a blank check.
And there's so much in between the wars too. Like, we keep focusing on the wars, but things that happen that lead to the wars. Once war comes, like World War II, because of all the involvement and continual press, I believe in a sense that we helped create an environment that allowed Hitler to rally a beat-down Germany state. And this is probably going to sound pretty controversial, but they were so destroyed from the reparations of World War I, and we just keep wanting to tell people what to do and westernize and do that, and it creates the environment. Right now, again, whether Russia, Ukraine, whatever they got going on involves us not set aside, where easily you can see how now, because we're pushing everybody in the corners, we're pushing Russia into the corners, and this is where it becomes unnatural because we're not letting, in my opinion, people settle things. I think this evolutionary.
Let them settle it. That's what you're saying.
Because it pins them in the corner. Just like Hitler had the ability, Putin will use this to rally now his influences with China and his influence with Iran. And all of a sudden, this is why they're coming to, the U.S. dollar starts getting challenged in the world because our stance is getting weaker, our policies are getting weaker. We can't afford to back the U.S. dollar anymore because we're running up the trillions you said that we're just stretching and stretching and stretching. We're creating a bigger monster by trying to fight them all. I'm telling you, we're walking into a world where, the BRIC nations, BRIs,
Yep.
for the first time,
BRICS.
their GDP is bigger than
Then
ours.
yeah.
You can't fund the world and not you. It all
Brazil,
comes that we're just
Russia,
trying to force
China.
love. We're trying to enforce, and we're not winning the hearts and minds of people. And that's where it's like I said, it sounds like a cynic, but
Oh,
if
see how
you
it is
follow
here?
the chart, it will run out. Our American dollar will lose because these nations are growing stronger,
Mm-hmm.
and all we're doing right now is keep pushing them and pushing them and pushing them to make you're the bad guy, and then there's no America.
I would
There's no
disagree.
preservation of freedom.
I understand. I agree with parts of what you're saying. I disagree with the part that we're not winning hearts and minds. And I only say that because, again, I've not been all over the world, but I go to South Africa. They're part of BRICS, unfortunately. But I go to South Africa, U.S. flags everywhere. Our tour guide's telling us they love America here because they actually were in the forefront of apartheid. I go to Ireland, monuments to our former presidents. They're like, when it came to the violence here in Belfast and everything going on, we love America because America got involved and helped. I'm telling you, like, I've been to so many nations where, I mean, they just love America because America got involved in a way that made their country a better place.
Yeah.
And I would too if I got saved. But again, we're not doing an imperialistic approach to it. So we're not being
Yeah.
recovered, and we're just fighting until our flame runs out, which means we have to go back to morality. Do we fight to extinction? Or
All right,
It's noble.
all right,
Yeah.
PZ.
Right?
What did you? I gave my big speech, and you said yes. I'm trying to answer some of our questions we've been talking through.
One word answer.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, Snarky, give us yes or no.
I meant to say no.
A quick one, no.
I would say, if you're asking me your yes or no question, I would say probably yes.
Wait. Yes, we should help.
Yes, we should
Okay,
help.
okay.
Yes.
That's-
I definitely probably still lean towards more interventionist, but more than ever, I think, how do you restrict or watch or be careful? I think things should be pulled back more than ever.
A limited yes.
A limited yes.
Yeah. I agree.
I agree.
We
with that.
definitely
say
can
li-
agree we need
I
to do
think-
more homework.
I agree. I think there should be a limited yes. I think we need a foreign policy badly.
Yeah.
So that would help. Which is maybe there's a reason why we don't have one. The world's really complicated, and the stuff we just got done talking
Yeah.
about is massively complicated, and we're not even including what is the economic goals
Yeah.
of these involvements, because there are economic goals in all this, and then there's a part of this that is not just about whether it's a selfish motive or altruism or other things, which is sometimes in the world you need allies.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to talk about survival of the fittest. How you survive in a world where you could have a whole lot of predators is you need allies. And so a lot of this comes into the current conflicts that are going on is, are they allies? Israel's been an ally. That's one reason why. And so part of what you have with actual documents with allies
Yeah.
is that you agree that if they go to war and conflict, that you will help.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a written agreement that happens with allies, and you just don't break that. And
Yeah.
so the question
You
is, how much
can, but-
you can, but how much? Okay, but again, is that a position you really want to be in when tables get turned on you?
I'm
And
not
so,
saying that we should. I'm just saying.
Like,
you
so that's
can.
where I think this is. Yeah.
This conversation.
You guys might want to review his employment contract real quick.
Say what? Yeah. No, I think these are all great questions. I think we have exposed how massively
Yeah.
complicated this is. Even if you
Yes.
remove
Yeah.
our biblical morality from this,
Yeah.
it's still so hard. And then think, what could we ever agree upon now at this
Yeah.
point as a nation, as a foreign policy would never happen. You institute something today, it's getting turned over in the next election by whoever comes. They're going to say, forget that and do their own thing.
That's one of those huge differences. We keep talking about the shift from Vietnam and all that. It wasn't just that we didn't have a foreign policy, but up until that point, there was always a general trust in the government.
Yeah.
All the previous wars, if the government, even if you didn't support it, you didn't really voice your opinion a lot between, you know, Twitter and stuff, social media. You just supported the government. Now,
There's a
that's
lack
why
of
we have
trust
no
in the
policy. Yeah, there's so
Yeah.
much mistrust. One tweet. Pastor
Yeah.
Tim tweets right now, this
I'm
stance
not.
is something.
Don't ask me. I'm
We're
not.
getting
That's why I
protests
don't.
out front.
This, I honestly, it's funny. I really do feel incredibly torn with this because there's this side of me that is.
That's what I'm acknowledging, by the way. I feel like I feel more torn than
Yeah.
before.
Well, and like even part of it is
feel
just
like this
even personally, my value
villain.
system. I despise xenophobia. I despise the thing that everybody has to varying degrees where you just don't like people that are different than you, and you don't, especially as a follower of Jesus. The person in Pakistan or Ethiopia Like, that's my fellow human being. Like, I despise Christian nationalism. I despise any amount of prejudice. As much as I love our country, I try to have more of, honestly, a globalist mindset where my brother is in Australia or China, or like, I try to have more of a human perspective. And Jesus tells us to love our enemies.
Yeah.
So I have all of that swarms through my mind and heart and brain.
It's
And
the
yet there's
walk
this
that's
side
got
of me that this is maybe the politically more conservative side of me that just on a more realism side, as far as like, okay, if you were just and like, I think you were hinting at this too, and I don't think any of the world's problems will be solved politically or militaristically. That's why Jesus didn't do it.
Yeah.
That's why that's not my mission in life. But gun to head, if you were to say, but what should our government do practically here and now on this earth in our broken system? A realist side of me kicks in. That's like, I don't want to be naive or selfish. And as long as we're here on this earth, let's do what we can with the power that's been entrusted to our responsibility. And that's where I'm really torn.
It's tough because I'm sure with being the contrarian, it sounds like I'm just evil. But truly, in my reality, these views to me are just views. But when it comes to what I want,
Yeah.
all I want to do is show up with Bible's love and hope.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's what's so funny about you.
That's
yes.
the thing. I don't.
Don't help them. I'll go
yeah.
give them a Bible, though.
That's the thing. In the sense of government stuff, to me, it's just it's the danger of the walk and growing. I'm just at this point anymore where you can't even talk to me about boundaries and nationalism because I'm like, that's not going to change anything. The world's always going to be at war. There's always going to be famines. And just to save myself from everything, that's truly my political stance. And when we take the morality out, that's why I have trouble arguing it.
Yeah.
But it's not to sing guns. It's not to do. I'm so more confused. Am I the guy? I enlisted in the Marine Corps or as an officer school. I'm a fan of supporting this country. The nation. But anymore, I'm at the point. Am I supposed to show up to Russia and Ukraine with a gun,
Right.
or am I supposed to just show up with a Bible and stand in between the two of them? And just love. And so if our isolation, if our expansion of the U.S. influence looks like handing out Bibles, I change all my stance.
Yeah.
On
Well,
everything.
there's a difference between, obviously, and we
Yeah.
all recognize it, a
Yes.
difference between how governments try to
Operate.
operate versus a personal conviction.
Yeah.
And I love that you have
Yeah.
that. And I think
Because that is who you are.
because this is why I've always kind of said that I'm a frustrated libertarian because
Yeah.
economically in certain policies I identify most with libertarian, but I've always tried to say this. I'm like, well, if I could be a libertarian with a soul.
Yeah.
Because libertarians don't have souls.
Yeah.
Libertarians don't care about
Yep.
anybody else. Libertarians only care
It's
about
just self-
freedom so that they can prosper and do well. And I'm like, that is antithetical to what I feel like I'm called to be as a follower of Jesus.
Well-
And so, again, not to conflate politics and
Yeah.
faith all the time. But
Guys, it's we better wrap this
I
up.
we could go on
This
forever.
has been-
It's a fascinating
This
conversation.
has been as juicy as I hoped.
should've split into two,
I don't
but-
know that we solved anything.
No.
By the way, as
Nothing.
our guest on the podcast, I got a surprise for you. You asked for it.
Oh,
I got you a
talking about
Swiss
violence and
pocket knife.
I'm a
Yeah.
pacifist. Oh, you got me a knife?
There we go.
And then I got one.
texted him. I said, "Can you give me a Swiss Army knife?"
I got you.
Appreciate it, bro.
I got you. I also have another one of these box of chocolates for you and your wife and your family.
Oh
Oh,
man.
save
So-
those for Lydia. She texted and said, "Can someone please save me some
Hey,
chocolate?"
we got us
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
chocolates
Yeah,
here.
we got
Save those
you.
for Lydia.
I'm sure we might have some responses from this podcast. Thanks for joining, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hope I
Dude, you're
wasn't
fun.
too much of a contrarian.
No.
No.
I
Oh,
love
that's
it. I
good.
love
Dude,
it.
we have those same like internal
Yeah,
tensions. I think we feel the same way as you
Ask
on
me
a lot
tomorrow,
of
it's a different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an ever-changing
that. Yeah,
journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but I like that. I think we're better off when we aren't so close-minded that we're not open to hearing different arguments and thoughts and go, I might back away from that
Right.
stance
Yeah.
a little, politically or certain
Yeah.
things. It challenges me. I love it.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
Thanks
cool.
for having me. This was
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode. And until next time, we'll see you next week. Hey guys, it's Russ. Thanks so much for listening. We really believe if we can get around tables instead of behind screens, if we can talk to each other instead of at each other, we can make the world better. To help us do that, here are a few things you can do to help. First, if you haven't yet, leave a review on Apple or Spotify and hit subscribe on YouTube. This helps more than you know. Also, if you have been impacted by the community out of which this podcast comes, that's X Church. Maybe you're local or you've been touched by the messages and impact across the country, even the world. I want to encourage you to support this work. A powerful life principle is to invest in the people and places that invest in you. And so I want to invite you to do that right now by going to thex.church/give. You can give a one-time small gift, a sacrificial gift, or even become a recurring partner. Together, let's keep elevating the conversation, thinking higher, loving deeper, and making the world better. Cheers.